It's an interesting thing, as I was explaining in my introduction, that I work at MIT, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is really a very universal place. People come from all over the world. You have the opportunity to experience many different cultures. We don't really know our own culture until we begin to interact with another one. I was listening to somebody on the radio talk about how when they were in Rome, and they went out shopping, and they looked around, and they went into a shopping center, and they said there was a whole aisle of pasta. That sounds pretty good to me. And then they said, but you know, it struck them because in the United States that's not true. But of course, in the United States, we're more likely to have a row of soft drinks, or a whole aisle of cereal boxes of all different flavors. I remember being in Chinatown with my friend, and I said, Mei, what are you looking for? And she said, I'm looking for a special kind of sauce or seasoning. And I looked, and it looked like 3/4 of the store was seasoning and sauce. And I'm like, how are you going to find what you're looking for there? It's an interesting thing, and I think it's especially true as we encounter faith. The faith life of many different cultures, many different expressions, all within our own Catholic identity. This year at MIT, we're going to be baptizing 6 young adults into the Catholic faith at the vigil. That's a tremendous thing. We have several who are preparing for confirmation and the other sacraments, and we see and we learn from the different cultures. I think one of the things that we can observe about our own culture is that we often have an aversion to the cross. Every culture and every person struggles with false gods, as we saw in the reading. All we have to do is kneel before achievement, or wealth, or a title, a position. That's all we have to do. But in the process, we deny our Lord and our God. In too many cases, it seems that we can prefer a faith that does not ask us for anything, that does not cost us anything, and that does not involve suffering and sacrifice. Now, perhaps there is such a faith, but that's not the Christian faith. It is not Christianity without the cross. What did St. Paul say? I preach Christ and Him crucified. If we're going to be disciples of Jesus, we're going to follow in His footsteps to the cross. There is no resurrection without the cross. I was talking to a Chinese friend who is a devout Catholic, and she told me that growing up in China, Mass was very difficult to come by, and often she would be woken up by her mother at 3 a.m. and they would rush off to a Mass. The priest would have come into town, and they would have Mass in the middle of the night in an underground church until the priest was discovered, and then he was often whisked away to be imprisoned. There were many impressive people at MIT, many Nobel Prize winners and cabinet secretaries. One of the most impressive men I met there is a man who was on the verge of tenure, and all he had to do was agree to work on embryonic stem cells. And he said, no, I believe in the sanctity of human life. He did not bend his knee to academia, to reputation. He'll probably never win a Nobel Prize. He didn't get tenure, but his reward in heaven will be great. I had visitors one day came to Mass, 3 people from Vietnam, 2 priests and a sister. The sister had been imprisoned many times and beaten more times than you could count for her faith. One of the priests had spent 3 years in prison. Another priest had spent 7 years in solitary confinement. All guilty of preaching the gospel. And the priest came down and he was vesting, and he apologized. He said, Father, I don't speak such good English. I said, Father, you're not going to have to say a word. And I introduced them and I told them this man had spent 7 years in prison out of love for Jesus Christ. And our students were so touched. You should have seen them all taking pictures with him to touch a real witness of the faith. And this is what we need, witnesses. We saw our beautiful Holy Father Francis yesterday, and he preached such a beautiful sermon. But how powerfully he preached when he got out of the Jeep and kissed and blessed that disabled man. What a beautiful witness to the cross. We are called not to run from the cross, but to embrace it. And not just to wallow in the suffering, but to see it as a path to the resurrection, through the cross to the crown. May God help us to be good and holy witnesses, so that others may find us attractive and want to know and love Jesus Christ for themselves.